Welcome. I'm Caleb Tutty, the CTO and one of the co-founders of Eskwelabs. This is a special time in the world, and this is a special moment for us, where we come together to celebrate the accomplishments of the Data Science Fellows, Eskwelabs Data Science Fellows, and discuss their capstone projects in a public forum. Eskwelabs is an online data upskilling school based in Manila. Our mission is to democratize the future of work through data skills education. Today is the second half of our two-day event, which will showcase the work of our data science fellows who have just completed a 12-week part-time program to launch their careers in data science. The fellowship is not just about skills building, it's also a community that's curious about how to use data to advance innovation and impact. Many of our fellows will go on to work in an industry. In fact, through our new interview guarantee partnerships we have introduced this year, fellows can choose to have guaranteed interviews at innovative companies like QuadX, Home Credit, Kumu, and more. But before they arrive at that future, they are going back to one of the reasons they wanted to learn data in the first place, which is to build a world that works. Throughout these presentations, if there's something you want to ask, please feel free to head on over to the Dory link that was sent in the chat to send your questions for the fellows, and we'll answer some of those later on. This demo day, we are reimagining the future with the data, where we envision how data will be a big part of our future lives through innovations in the startup ecosystem and in the healthcare industry, all through projects which provide a unique Philippines context. Before we get started, I have the honor of making a string of introductions. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and it definitely takes a whole community to create budding data scientists. Let me first introduce you to one of our data science instructors, who will also be our moderator for this evening. JC Peralta is an early career climate and data scientist at AC Energy. He received his master's in atmospheric science from ADMU in 2019 and has worked extensively with climate data with a focus on modeling the local dynamics and impacts of regional monsoons over the Philippines and in Southeast Asia. He's also worked on several projects in disaster science, transport networks, data for social good, and climate action advocacies. Next, I want to introduce our distinguished guests and friends from the industry who will make up our panel of judges for this evening. Francis Bautista of Indigo Research. Francis is a teacher at Ateneo de Manila University and an AI researcher by profession. Before founding Indigo Research, he led data science teams at PLDT and SMART. He specializes in natural language processing and social intelligence. When he's not working on these things, he's brewing coffee and enjoying music. Dominic Ligot of Seralytics. Dominic founded Seralytics, a social impact data analytics company, and co-founded Data Ethics PH, an online community focused on social issues such as data privacy, data security, AI-driven discrimination, data liabilities, data ownership rights, and data poverty. Doc also co-founded the Analytics Association of the Philippines and is a Board of Trustees member of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. Doc holds a postgraduate certificate in data-driven marketing and an advanced marketing research from Cornell University and clinical epidemiology from Utrecht University. Kevin Gabayan of Plentina. Kevin is the CEO and co-founder of Plentina, a startup building services and technologies to increase credit access in emerging markets. He previously founded a team at Google building for emerging market financial inclusion and was a machine learning software engineer in Android's activity recognition team. He was a student researcher at NASA Ames and led data science at Bump Technologies, which was acquired by Google in 2013. He holds 4 patents in mobile data and interaction and has an all but thesis PhD on electrical engineering from Stanford University. And myself, I am the CTO of Eskwelabs And I was the first data scientist at Westpac in New Zealand, evangelizing new processes and technologies and consulting across different functions within the bank. Prior to working in the financial sector, I was also an award-winning data journalist, crafting interactive visualizations as narrative storytelling across themes including election results, property prices, unethical investments, education, crime, and health. I also co-founded Nucon, an AI construction tech startup with projects across Singapore, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Kuala Lumpur, and London. But I began my career as a software engineer working for startups, including developing mobile analytics platforms for brands like Coke, Oreo, DreamWorks, and One Direction. What's unique with the capstone projects that students will be showcasing is that they will represent exciting innovation in the startup ecosystem at this very moment. To help us set the context for the first project that will be presented, we've invited Joseph Amara, one of the co-founders of Mayani. Mayani is the Philippines' fastest growing impact-driven farm-to-table platform, empowering over 23,000 smallholder farmers by connecting them to over 10,000 B2C consumers and solid B2B brands such as Shell, Robinsons, Walmart, Ayala Foundation, UCC Group, and Healthy Options, amongst others. Today, Mayani is now VC funded and is the first ever Philippine agri-tech startup backed by AgFunder, the world's most reputable agtech focused VC, along with Buko Ventures and impact investors from the World Bank IC and media giant GMA. Let us all welcome Joseph Amara of Mayani.
Thank you, Caleb. Checking my audio first. Is it clear? Sounds good. Audio check. All right. Thank you again for the warm introduction. It's an honor to be in the presence of, experienced students and brilliant students. If I may, we've been working with the Eskwelabs students for quite some time now, and we have nothing but great things to say on how everything turned out, especially in our capstone project. So maybe humbly giving a brief background on our company, and again thanking the opportunity for this moment and this program. So again, I am Joseph Amara, currently as of creating the slide, CTO of Mayani, which we started back in 2019. So we're roughly around 2 years old now. I just made the shift to COO. So I deal with, that mainly gives you an idea that I dabble with tech and operations. So basically execute things. So I'd call Mayani your pretty, I guess, a storybook or something of a, because I grew up watching Shark Tank and all those startup series and even movies relating to the tech industry and even startups. So we formed Mayani, honestly not expecting this kind of scale, this kind of traction, but this was a legit photo. So you can see our CEO, JT, wearing shorts. This was, I asked permission for him to be part of the slide. That's me right there. But we started off wanting to enter the space. We knew that there were not much players, but there were already established players in the industry here in the country. But we started off idolizing foreign unicorns already, such as TaniHub. You can Google them. TaniHub is an, oh, sorry, my screen is not being shown. Hold on, give me a moment. Screen. Okay, going back to my slides. There, we started off doing your typical story. I guess this is important to share because we quote unquote grew up in the startup scene, hearing these stories when Grab started off doing deliveries just using Excel, Google Sheets, and just Viber communicating with their riders. So we just followed and made sense. Our CEO is pretty much comes up with the idea and then executes. So first, to humbly tell you how Mayani sort of assembled. I'm not obviously the only co-founder. There are 6 of us. So it all started with Sir Ochi, our chief farmer, who's a humble farmer president in Batangas, Lian, Batangas. he was part of church circle. I don't know if maybe it's relevant with Jeff Barrero, who's our chief executive here, and shared the story of back then there was an oversupply, quote unquote oversupply, because I personally saw it on my Facebook feed wherein there would be tons of tomatoes for sale apparently at only 5 pesos. That's what 10 US centavos per kilo, and they were selling it at a loss just so that they could sell it before it gets spoiled or rotten. And we just analyzed the problem, spent a couple of weeks, and came up with the conclusion that there's no oversupply. When these viral stories came into each one's Facebook timeline, they were more than willing to support. And apparently 10 tons of tomato was easy to sell just because of social media support. So with that, Sir Ochi, our chief farmer, started sharing different produces and different just problems in the current system. And back then this was pre-pandemic. So I'll fast forward, well, maybe not, but we were starting to just maybe proceed before proceeding to the slides. The problem that we are trying to solve is farmers such as Sir Ochi here would have to go through 6 to 7 layers of middlemen just before their produce hits the market here in Metro Manila. Metro Manila is considered a mega city, one of the biggest mega cities in Southeast Asia, wherein I don't want to throw in facts, but I believe there's 30 million people or more in just one mega city. So main drop off point for a lot of our farmers in NCR in Luzon, which is the one of the biggest islands in the Philippines. So with that, it goes through 6 to 7 layers of middlemen. To give you an idea who these middlemen are, it's mainly those who are, number one, who have the capital to lend farmers money to buy seeds and equipment, or either they have the logistics, they have the bigger trucks, they have the means of getting their produce from their farm to Metro Manila. And then number three, the stall owners here in Metro Manila, the palengke owners, the distribution chains, yung mga baksakan. So mainly they make so much, they put in so much profit that at the end the farmer makes so little, and these 6 to 7 layers of middlemen make so much. So that's one of the problems that we are trying to solve, and thus we came up with a platform, Mayani. So am I sharing, did it transfer to my Microsoft Edge? Assuming yes, then I will proceed. So here, assuming I'm showing the right screen, so here's Mayani, a humble platform that we can easily say that we built on top of Shopify. So as the CTO, we started off as a humble startup with just 5 co-founders. And honestly, I can swear that we started off with just 50,000 in our bankroll. We used that for the first 3 months, just research and development, us going to the farms. I think I prepared a couple of, no, yeah. This was back when we rented out a house, which cost us 12,000 pesos per month, and then small garage here, and then we did the delivery. So this was pre-pandemic, but as you can see, the riders are ahead of time. They were wearing their face masks already. So yeah, we haven't changed. We're still on Shopify 2.5 years later. Maybe I'll talk about that later, but we've gotten a lot of advice because of the support that we've gotten. So as you can see here, we onboarded fruits and vegetables. We did deliveries via just a third party, a small logistics company called We Express, using Google Sheets and Viber. We focused on one product in this photo. I think we partnered with Region 2 to move garlic, tons of garlic. So yeah, how did we scale? So humbly again, as a simple startup, we didn't have that much funds yet. We got the opportunity. Our first real opportunity was in Rice, Hong Kong, wherein we got the support of DTI and local government. So there's really, if you knock on the right doors, and I don't want to be too political. I don't want to be political, honestly, but then the government really does give support to whoever asks. So they found out that we're really working so hard to support farmers. And the rice in Hong Kong back then, I wasn't really full time in Mayang, so I had a day job back then. So we had our experience in pitching, and yeah, I can see we have 3 minutes left. So we scaled To cut it short, we started moving different products, tapping different advertising partners, different marketing partners. We've scaled so much that we've gotten tremendous support from government, from different even corporations, even payment platforms, and our hub has grown so much, our staff has grown so much, employees has grown so much. So moving to our platform, we're built on Shopify, and now diving deep into data. We probably I could say I'm proud of. We have 9,500 customers on our platform. We really have not considered moving out of Shopify because Shopify does its job in terms of keeping data. I have a tech team of 5 full-time software developers. We've considered building our own proprietary platform, but we weighed it out and took months to consider. But we're still gonna stick with Shopify just because Shopify really supports what we need. We have 9,000 orders that I've passed to the data students. I've actually passed a sort of date range for them to work on. And one of our needs, I think, is really raising. I won't show any more analytics. We've created the first, one of the biggest products that the tech team is currently developing, and it's actually on the testing phase is the farmer's dashboard. This sort of acts as an admin platform for the farmers to pledge their harvest and hopefully match demand versus supply. So that's something that we're cooking, but we requested from students just basically customer segmentation and basket referral, highlighting which products would work the best over the given data over our quote unquote healthy 2-year period. Yeah, I guess that's a bit of background on our capstone project. Leah's a lot. I freely shared data, also had to censor a lot, but made sure to identify related customer orders. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, reading a message. Okay, then maybe if I've covered everything out, I'm okay to entertain any questions on chat. But mainly, I'd like to introduce the capstone group. AJ O'Connor, Renzo Rodelas, Matthew Tomas, Louis J. Gemida. Sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And Charity Benignos to present Mare Mayani Recommender Engine. Good luck, guys. Thank you again.
Good day, we are the Pinya Group, and today we will be presenting our company Capstone, a recommender engine for Mayani. But before we start, let me introduce you to 3 different people. Nanay Caridad is what you would call a regular. She discovered online grocery shopping and has been a consistent fan ever since. Our next customer is Lorenzo. He wants to eat healthy, so he ordered vegetables online so he can be forced to eat right and, of course, help farmers. But because of his busy lifestyle, he hasn't been able to cook much and hasn't ordered again. Next, meet Tito Andrelito. He buys online groceries every now and then, but then, sometimes because of work and family, he forgets to pre-order and just goes grocery shopping at the local supermarket instead. These 3 people are part of customer clusters who are the end users who will be using our desired product, which is also our overarching objective, that is, to create a recommendation engine that would increase Mayani customers' market baskets and through that, help smallholder farmers lead better lives. But before we can do anything, we start off with EDA with Matt Thomas.
Thanks, Chatty. For the EDA, we begin with looking at the data of the daily sales of Mayani from May 15, 2019 to July 22, 2021. As you can see, Mayani's sales really picked up during the first ECQ when it was implemented at around March 2020, and then it peaked the next month at 1.8 million pesos at April 2020. And then after that, business played around at 200,000 to 600,000 range until it increased again at when the second ECQ was implemented at April 2020. On our next slide, we see Mayani sales per day of the week. As you can see, most of Mayani sales happen during the weekdays, and it starts winding down on Fridays. Here we see Mayani's top 10 city sales. We actually included all the cities in the country. However, data shows that most of Mayani's sales occur in the NCR area. Then next, we looked at the seasonality of the products of Mayani. So for summer, you can see those are the top 10 bestsellers of Mayani: pineapple, rice, tomato. And then now for rainy season, it's chicken, avocado, tomato, chop suey basket. And for the Christmas season, it's different naman. With the United Cagayan Relief Pack, rice, chicken. So next up, we look at Grand Bagsakan, which is Mayani's promotion, which comprises actually 56% of its sales from January to July 2021. So as you can see, it has a different top 10 bestsellers from Chop Suey Basket, Diverse Mangoes, Avocado, and White Onion. Thank you. And then here is the Grand Bagsakan daily sales. As you can see, it peaks around Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Okay, so now we want to analyze the current recommendation system of Mayani on their website, which is based on Shopify, that is based on purchase history and product descriptions of their items. We tried to reverse engineer the Shopify, and as a result, we saw that the clusters are far from each other, the networks are far from each other. So there's a high chance that same products will be recommended for different users, and it is highly dependent on what was already in their cart. And we want to compare this with real transaction data of Mayani. We did market basket analysis of their data, and we saw that the networks are more coherent and they are more interconnected to each other. Our specific objective in this capstone is we want to make a better recommendation engine for Mayani that would consider the buyer's buying habit and the kinds of products that are frequently bought together. In other words, if I am this person and I buy this product, what other products can I buy? So for our methodology, at first we business understanding, and then we analyze our data. After analyzing our data, we did data preparation. We cleaned the data, we did EDA, and we did feature engineering. After cleaning our data and preparing our data, we did our models, RFM, K-means clustering, MBA analysis, and a priori. After doing our models, we evaluated our results, and finally, we deployed our model. For the features, for the customer information, we considered their order date, their count of orders, and their total spendings. For the product informations, on the other hand, we considered the product name.
So let's define first what is RFM. RFM stands for recency, frequency, and monetary. It is a method or strategy to analyze customer value by their spending habits, wherein recency is how recently the customers purchase, frequency is how often do they purchase, and monetary is how do they spend. So after we computed those features, we came up with the 3 clusters of customer segmentation using K-means, wherein the number of cluster is 3 and the silhouette scores is around 58%. Although the number of clusters of 2 is higher than the 3, technically it is impossible to have 2 types of customer, the good and the bad customers. By using these 3 clusters, we determine their cluster label, wherein the segment 0 is labeled as regular customers. They don't spend as much as high as the loyal customer. Next is the segment 1, which is the inactive customers. They are the inactive in all aspects. And lastly, the segment 2 is the loyal type of customer that their RFM is considered as best, most frequent, and higher in monetary. This segment is most important to Mayani. By creating those clusters, we created a different sub-segments of customer based on their clusters.
So how do we connect the 2 models? So first, we divided them into 2. So if there's a new user with no account, it recommends based on the general a priori algorithm. And for the second one, it recommends based on the clusters from the customer segmentation. So what is the a priori algorithm? Basically, it recommends an items that are frequently bought together depending on the metrics of support and confidence. If it is within the threshold, it will match that item with another item that's frequently bought together. So for the demo, it will show you an application. So as you can see, for example, I click alugbati. So it will recommend the items okra, ampalaya, pineapple. So let's say I click okra. So it recommends white onion, lombok, pineapple. So there's a limitation with this model. For example, the product that you chose is not within the threshold. It will just recommend the top products that are being bought in Mayani. So for our limitations, so the data that does not include demographics. So the models are only based on past transactions and they are prone to concept drift. And also the deployed model does not include customer segmentation output. For the recommendations, so we need to get more data to add new dimensions to the models and improve the models to process real-time data, which includes, so we need to include also the customer segmentation output to be deployed to the recommender engine.
And for our recommendations for Mayani in particular, aside from our recommendation engine, our market basket analysis or frequently bought together items can be used to suggest bundles. This can also be used with other segmentation methods like RFM or during seasonal or promotional events to suggest customer or time-specific bundles. Our RFM clusters, which are 7 in total, can also be used for personalized marketing campaigns. For example, to segregate Mayani's mailing lists and send out different messages or campaigns to different kinds of people. And lastly, we highly suggest the standardization of products for easier future data analysis, especially as Mayani grows even bigger and more impactful in the Filipino agri-commerce landscape. We end this presentation and demo with a quote from Tiara Kessler, which states that an industry that feeds you is an industry worth fighting for. Once again, thank you so much, Mayani, for entrusting us with your data and letting us be a part of helping small farmers in the country.
All right, all right. Thank you so much, Team Mare, for that presentation. And good evening, everyone. So my name is JC. I am your moderator for this evening. So for our audience, and as mentioned in the chat, so please just check out the chat. Please feel free to head over to our Dory link. So you may just click on that bit.ly link to send in your questions for the group. And we will answer some of your questions later. So for now, I will be opening the floor for our judges here for their questions to the group. So anyone could ask them. Okay, I see Dr. Dominic Ligot from Zerolytics raising his hand. So floor is yours, sir.
Hi, good evening, and congratulations, Mayani, for accomplishing your capstone. No, just want to ask. So you have a recommendation engine. How would you know if the recommendations actually work, or what would be the process? I mean, I'm assuming you haven't actually recommended items yet, or have you already done it in a live situation? So how would you know if the recommendations are actually better than the current?
Hello, good evening. So I would like to answer this question. So as mentioned before, Shopify provided very little information on how its algorithm works. So we proceeded to reverse engineer the algorithm and visualize the networks. Then we compared this to actual transaction data and found that the network of items that have been bought together is very different from the current algorithm being used. Because of this reason, we have decided to use the a priori algorithm, which is an association rule-based mining algorithm, to make the recommendations a bit closer to actual transaction data. So it's now working in the demo site.
Yeah, but just as a follow-up, no? So you used a priori to, in a way, group the commonly purchased items together. But how do you know if the groupings are better than like the original recommendation? I mean, it's different for sure, but do you have some sort of a measure to, in a way, quantify the difference? Because when you deploy I mean, in practice, when you normally deploy a recommendation algorithm, you have to be able to prove to the client or to your management that, hey, look, the recommendations are doing better. Maybe the conversion rate is higher or whatever, right? Or the sales is better. So in this case, since it's kind of a closed loop experiment, is there a way of measuring whether, like, how better the groupings are compared to the original? Or if you haven't done it, any thoughts about how you might do it?
Oh, I guess it will be an ongoing process since we are actually waiting for deployment. So um, it will be the model will currently be revised as to suit the needs of Mayani. But as of now, we will definitely take that in consideration because right now our basis is only qualitative, like oh, this works. This product recommends this product better compared to the old one, and it's closer in terms of network analysis. So definitely, thank you so much. We will consider that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Shati. No, I think it should be highlighted. No, that's something that's made out of a boot camp. No, being deployed in the industry, like in Mayan, in a platform. It's quite a big thing, and I want to congratulate the group for having that standard. No, it's already industry quality. So I wonder if our other judges have any more questions on the group's output.
Yeah, if I may,
Yes,
well,
please,
first,
Kevin.
congratulations on this impactful project, and so it's exciting that you have an industry partner that is, raring to try this out and work with their team. And shout out to Mayani as well. Glad to bump into you again after bumping into each other at Cognitive Labs earlier this year. I'm curious, how the performance of the current algorithm feels to the team. After maybe sifting through the data manually and getting a sense for what the customers typically do, whether they're loyal customers or they're new customers, then does it do the recommendations make sense to you? And does it, do you feel like there's opportunity for like if a human were to make those recommendations manually, then do you feel like there's room for improvement, or is the algorithm already making pretty much the best recommendation that you think the data provides?
Yeah, thanks for the question. As of now, our algorithm works based on the past transactions of Miami. So I cannot say that the algorithm recommends perfectly what the customers really want. So um yeah, so we're basing on past transactions only. So we're limited to that.
Hello. In addition to that, for our recommendation, we also want to add the what kind of behavior does the customers do, like the clicks in the products, like viewing the product and buying the product and so on. So we also want to add that in order to have a better um in our algorithms.
Great. And also, just sifting through some of the data that the loyal customers have produced, then are there any common patterns from the behavior of the loyal customers that you might be able to exploit so that you might be able to either drive a larger number of loyal customers being generated by I guess leading new users to the water there on how they might become loyal customers, Or are there particular items that the loyal customers seem to tend to buy more of that might just focus new user attention to?
Anyone may answer the question.
Matt, I think you're muted.
It's ano no, yung common pattern na yung sa yeah, I think it was shown in our presentation na yun nga, most of our Mayanis customers buy during yun nga, yung weekdays so far, yeah. Which is parang if you look at it, parang it's kind of different. When you buy, I mean, normal people don't buy vegetables during weekends, right? So parang I guess really it's a different insight.
And in addition to that, we wanted to
Hello? Hello? Sorry. Hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay.
So-
In addition to that, we at first we wanted to make a machine learning model that could predict new customers. But we are kind of limited with our data. So for our future recommendations, so we might want to make our algorithms better or the recommendation engine better with that.
And
All right.
actually, sorry.
Yes, go Chatty.
Sorry. Actually, we've shown this to the company already, and we found some trends. And based on those trends, Mayani actually found some insights. Like, for example, they have peak seasons during this time, so they concluded that, oh, maybe we should maybe we should repeat what we have been doing during that time. Even something as simple as that can already be of great value to the company.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Thank you, and congratulations again.
Curious on what Caleb has to ask this group as an instructor and someone who has actually taught them how to model. Caleb, what are your questions?
Oh, thank you, Jesse. Yeah, I guess thank you, Kevin, so far for such good questions. I was flicking through it and I did see one of the slides of the recommendations of a tomato and the recommendations being something like lettuce. So I think things like that might be ways of sort of testing intuitions, as sort of Kevin was saying, like, does that seem to make sense? But yeah, I found it interesting. You mentioned sort of concept drift as well, and what could be things that might make this out of date? What might you need to consider about when you want to sort of retrain this model?
Hello. Yes, thank you for that question. As we mentioned before, the data that we use are just based on the current transactions. And then Mayani has, they have these campaigns that within this campaign, they sell these products. So so that is the model is very prone to concept drift because of those campaigns. And to combat this, I think if given the more data from the Shopify that they have, the API, we could make the model more recommend better items if we have more data, like the demographics. And my teammate mentioned before about the clicks for the products, which items they add to cart, and which items did they actually buy from the cart, or they just add it and then remove it again. So I think this would enhance the model.
Okay. Yes, I also think that would be the next step for this. No, you would have to take you have to have a hand on how the model's performing as it is deployed now. Okay. Then finally, I think I have to call our last panel to share his questions to you. Francis, go ahead.
Hi guys, good evening. Congrats on the capstone. It's really interesting stuff. I'm always happy to see tech applied to the farming industry. Just one quick question. I think it's more of clarification. You guys mentioned you were clustering your user behavior through looking at the patterns now. And I was playing along with the React site you guys had. And did it did it ever occur to you guys to look into the sales patterns and potentially what people could be making out of what people buy? Because normally when you, well, at least in my experience, in my mom's experience, when we buy groceries, when we buy vegetables, you usually have maybe something in mind that you're working towards, no? You don't just buy the most random vegetables and fruits and cook up something with that. Normally you have a preset recipe. Is this something you were able to capture? Or if ever, would this be something that might be valuable to the recommendations and analysis you might be working with?
Yes, I think that would be real valuable if we were able to base it on for like a recommendation engine based on recipes. But for this one, it's just based on past transactions, and we use the a priori algorithm. Yeah.
When you mentioned the a priori algorithm, what specifically would this be? Like, walk me through the process.
Okay, so basically we get the all of the transaction data, and then for per order, it checks which items are frequently bought together. So it depending on the support metric and the confidence metric, there's a threshold, and then if the recommended product is within that threshold, it will recommend it. The engine will recommend that product with the other products.
Got it. Sige. So, okay, that's really interesting stuff, no? But I think maybe what you guys can look towards into maybe if you're pursuing this later on, no, would be to, yes, have that sort of market basket analysis where you look to group behavior, but also look at what people buy with each other and what sort of weights these objects might have. I mean, garlic and onions, everyone buys that. But if you go to something more exotic like arugula or rocket, this might be, definitely pricier, but you could definitely, it probably is a limited amount of food you can cook with these more exotic vegetables. And you might be able to get valuable insights for your customer if you're able to extract these sort of phenomena. Yeah, I think that's all my questions. Great work, guys. Looking forward to what you guys pull out of this.
All right, good job answering our panel's questions, Team Mayani, and congratulations again. I see some questions from our audience, but unfortunately, we won't have time to answer them. If this may be of use, no, we have also posted the group's project showcase website in the chat. So I think some of the details, the finer details of the project are written there, so you may check that out. Okay. So, yes. Who's
Can I ask one more question or maybe a comment?
sorry? Yes. I think I lost my connection for a bit.
To the Mayani team now. Out of
Sure.
curiosity, how big was the data? Like how many customers, how many transactions, and how long was the time period? Nakamute.
Wait, sir. But yung data is we started is from May 2019 to July 2020. So I'll
Okay.
just check how many transactions were there. So
Just roughly. The reason why I'm asking is in case you need a lead, no, to figure out if it actually works. One of the easiest things to do is to do the classic train and test approach. So just cut it up into some percentage So you do your clustering on 60% and then try to detect in the latter 40% if, you know, parang, okay, customer X bought a tomato, you recommend lettuce. Then check in the latter data set if they in fact did buy lettuce. No? And then you have some sort of an accuracy metric. Another way is to do a hypothesis test. Just compare what Shopify or what was it, the e-commerce recommendation was, and then check if they in fact bought that recommendation. So now you have a comparison na, diba? Between what was the Shopify recommendation. Maybe it's 10% accurate. And then you have some sort of a lift from that, no, 30, 40%. Just it's the easiest thing to do. So that when you talk to your client, you can say, hey, look, our algorithm outperforms Shopify by X%. I mean, you can already intuitively know that because your clustering looks better. Pero that's the, in a way, that's the train set. Eh. So need to be able to test it. Whether you test it randomly or by time. And then that's another thing. No? If you started in 2019, don't forget to factor the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit in March, intuitively, you would expect buying patterns to change. So you might want to, you were talking about concept drift, data drift. That would have been a concept drift right there. No? At least I would have expected a concept drift. So just as a comment. But yeah, great work.
Okay, guys. I hope you were able to take note of that, no? Just in case your engagement with Mayani extends beyond this bootcamp. Wink, wink. Okay. So I think our next speaker is ready. So I'd now like to introduce our second capstone project for the night. With her project Devin, or dashboard for the epidemiology of viral infections, let's give a round of applause to Heidi May Balsera.
Before I get started with my presentation, I want to ask all of you, have you all been vaccinated? Because thankfully, with vaccines, we're starting to win against this pandemic. But are we ready for the next? Because now it's our responsibility to make sure that we are ready for what comes next in the future. And today, I want to help us prepare for the next pandemic with Devin, a dashboard for the epidemiology of viral infections. Let's go back a few years, around 2018, where a group of researchers were very interested in a new strain of influenza, very concerned that it would cause a new epidemic. And in the latter years, it did. But not because of influenza, but because of SARS-CoV-2 that caused the COVID-19 pandemic that the world, along with the Philippines, were woefully unprepared for. In fact, to date, there are over 1.5 million cases and over 26,000 deaths. And unfortunately, that is not the end of it, because the next pandemic is not an if, but a when. Thankfully, though, we can prepare for it. How? Well, we have data on our side. Speaking of data, let's go ahead and take a look what we have. We can take a look at our viruses that are present in the Philippines, care of NCBI and UNIPROT databases. And then let's focus on the target genes that make them virulent. And aside from the viruses, let's take a look who and where they infect. Let's focus on the region level of the Philippines, focusing as well on other factors such as population, as well as the healthcare capacity, care of DNR, PSA, and the Department of Health. What do we do now with that data? Well, Devin will first create clusters to determine what risk is being posed. And then we're characterizing the regions to determine how they are vulnerable to these risks. And then finally, based on these characteristics, we cluster them so that we can prepare proper recommendations tailor-fit for each region. Let's dive right in. For viruses, we first started collecting at the genome level and then going to collecting their query cover and GC content. So how did we go from this to this? Well, first off, again, we did local alignment sequencing of each virus gene, and then we grouped them together based on their virulence factors. So in total, we have 5 virulence factors that we consider when we do our k-means clustering. Aside from that, we also took a look at their virulence score, which is just a very intuitive way to determine or compare with each other how they are more virulent. Now let's take a look at what clusters we had. So we're able to generate a total of 4 clusters. Our first cluster we can refer to as our virulent cluster. So this cluster is very efficient at causing diseases because of their elevated mutation rates and because they make use of polyproteins, which means they're very efficient at infecting hosts and causing these severe diseases. A great example is our dengue virus. The next cluster are the infectious clusters. Unlike virulent clusters, these are more geared towards just infecting the host, but not necessarily causing severe symptoms. Perfect example again is of course SARS-CoV-2, which we know is highly infectious, but not exactly as fatal. Our third cluster is our replicative cluster. So this cluster is very good at integrating itself within the host. So once it infects, it has all these assembly proteins that help it integrate and infect the host further. Again, perfect example is our MERS-CoV. And our final cluster is our robust cluster. So this is our sturdy cluster because of their high encapsulation factors that make them very resistant to different disturbances, whether these are genomic or environmental. Now that we have our clusters, let's take a look at where we can find them by taking a look at the regions. So for this method, we took a look at all the databases that had species observations and then comparing it with the region demographics. So now, how exactly did we go from virus species and then to region characteristics? So this is what we did. So with the virus clusters, we listed all of the potential hosts that they had. And also for all of the regions, we listed down where each species of these hosts occur. So whether these are provinces or regions. Then we group them together so that we could count how many times each host appears in each region. And from there, we group that together with other region demographics such as the healthcare capacity, population density, and the mortality rate. And this is what we use to cluster for our regions. Leads us to our next step where we put it all together. So here we have our final data, which we will use to generate 2 types of characterizations of our regions. First is we want to categorize how we generate our recommendations and interventions. And then we want to categorize their level of viral risk. And that is what we give to Devin so that he can generate a useful dashboard. Aside from that, we can also make use of an exposure and vulnerability score. The exposure score is just an idea of how many host viral clusters are available based on the weight of their virulence score, while the vulnerability score is how vulnerable are the regions based on the mortality and the population density divided by the healthcare capacity, because it's shown that as your healthcare capacity increases, your vulnerability score should decrease. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our first group of clusters. We're able to generate a total of 5 great cluster regions. So our first cluster region is very obvious, overcapacity. It's where the healthcare capacity is not enough to meet the infection rates and of course the mortality rates. A prime example of this is NCR. Our second cluster is the marginal capacity. Very similar to the overcapacity, but the difference is that the healthcare resources is still able to meet the mortality and infection rates, but it's borderline between not being able to cater to these infection rates. Again, an example of this is ARMM. Our third region is our susceptible regions that although they have very good healthcare capacity, they are highly susceptible to the viral clusters that pose very severe symptoms, and that causes a high mortality rate in their population. So an example are our region 6. And of course, we have our fourth cluster, the manageable cluster. So this is a very lucky cluster because their healthcare resources and their infection rates are enough so that they can keep their mortality rates at bay. A wonderful example here is region 1. And finally, we have our unrelated cluster. Now, you may notice that this cluster has a very high mortality rate. But the reason why we say it's unrelated, because despite the high mortality rate, their viral counts are not as high, meaning these fatalities may not be related to viral infections. A hint may be because of their high population density or other factors like their healthcare capacity. And now let's take a look at our other way of classifying our regions by risk. So thankfully, we're able to get that by comparing their vulnerability and exposure score. So we have 6 level of classification. So we have our lower bound, which is the non-viral risk. Then we have our low viral and our probable viral risk. And on the upper bound, we have our medium viral risk, high viral risk, and our critical viral risk. Now, where do these all categories come in? Well, here we can see where exactly the priority groups are and how each region is classified based on the type of recommendation that we can provide them. And that's where Devin comes in. Finally, we can get the interventions provided by Devin. These are based on the CDC guidelines, and they are divided into 3 types: for the individual, for the workplace, school, and community, and finally, for the healthcare system. But it doesn't stop there, because Devin can also give us the list of specific viruses that each region is at risk for. And if the DOH or any healthcare institution has made any intervening efforts or vaccination efforts, Devin will also provide this. But of course, what better way not to just tell you, but to show you. So this is a sneak peek of Devin, and it's a very simple dashboard where the user can input their selected region, and then it will show you different statistics that we mentioned earlier, and then list down the recommendations that were generated. But of course, Devin, along with data science and epidemiology, is as much of an art form as it is a science. And iterations will always improve it. So here we have our recommendations are improvement. First off is we should increase our sample size. Let's not limit to a few viruses and increase it to not just RNA, but also maybe 2 double-stranded RNA. We can also include what other virulence factors we take into consideration and improve the different collection of species occurrences in our regions. We can also try out different methods for alignment and clustering. And more importantly, we can try out or improve the scoring system used for the risk, vulnerability, and exposure. And of course, the interventions that we can provide with Devin can also be increased. And that is it for my presentation with Devin. I hope that this will help us become more prepared, just like I am now prepared to answer your questions. Thank you.
All right, all right. Thanks so much, Heidi, for that presentation. No, so again, for our audience, as mentioned in the chat, please feel free to head over to our Dory link to send in your inquiries and questions for Heidi. And now it's time, for us to answer, for Heidi to answer your questions, especially for the panelists. So if I may just interject quickly, this is the first time that we're hosting a, a bioinformatics project, in all of the capstones that we had, and it's also marrying with a susceptibility study over the geographical regions of the Philippines. So it's an incredibly layered project, and I want to congratulate Heidi for pulling it off. So if any of our panel wants to take on the first question, you're free to speak up.
Yeah, first, congratulations, Heidi, on this project that just feels super ambitious, shooting for the moon here. With all the things that would love to accomplish through this project. I guess as an average citizen, then from this project, then I would love to know, should I be protecting myself more than I am today? Should I put on that mask? Should I get vaccinated after looking at this data? And so I'm super curious. Does this how does this model what does this model say about about COVID if that information was available in this data set, or was there any other similar virus in that data set that would behave similarly to COVID that would align with what's happened in the Philippines, and does that did that align with any outbreaks that happened in the Philippines?
Yes, thank you for that question. So the purpose of this project really is to identify which regions or which viruses pose the risk of starting an epidemic. So unfortunately, the information of how COVID would spread or viruses like COVID would spread to other regions is not really the scope of this project, but it's definitely a factor that the future iterations would be very helpful in applying, especially since we can also take a look at the previous history of the regions if they had any outbreaks related to the viruses that were mentioned that they are at risk for.
And then the scores generated from the models, virulence, exposure, do they align with what we might expect, that maybe the common cold is less of a threat compared to Ebola or something? I'm not sure what was in the data set.
Yes, so actually it's very interesting because it did align. So the way we did test out the reliability of this is by comparing the clusters that were formed by the homology by the cladograms of the actual viruses. So we can see that there is a distinct homology between the formed clusters. And we also saw that some clusters, such as the infectious clusters, that's where some rhinoviruses, so they're not exactly fatal, but they're very infectious.
Thank you.
All right, Sir Dominic is raising his hand. Go ahead.
Hi, congratulations, Heidi, for a really relevant project. So I'm just curious about who did you create this app for? Who would be your ideal user, and how would they, or how do you envisage them to use the information you provide?
Yeah, so the main target is actually for this project, it's the policymakers, specifically whether it's a region level or it's even just a LGU level. The real purpose is, I was very inspired with the idea that if we had known like what virus or what preventions we could have done even before COVID, we could have had a much better response. So this is really to help increase the disease preparation or mitigation of our country. So that's the policymakers is my target audience for this project.
So just as an immediate follow-up, given your immediate findings, no, what is an immediate policy action? I mean, just hypothetically, because you were able to group some regions, diba? So what do you expect them to do with that information? Like, for example, NCR is overcapacity and these other regions are other categories. So what's the action that you think will be appropriate?
Yes, so based on the recommendations were generated for now, since it's the recommendations are still a very draft. For NCR, for example, or overcapacity regions, based on what CDC said, it's like limit the capacity of certain institutions or buildings and transportation methods. While for regions in the marginal capacity, where the main issue or main recommendation is give focus on healthcare allocation, give monitoring on how these limited resources should be allocated to not just the people who are in the lower economy. It's more of which people or populations are more at risk or susceptible.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I think Francis has his hand up.
Right. Yeah. Hi, Heidi. Really great work. It really looks like you have a healthcare background, no, by how the slides were presented. It really looked familiar, like it was a virology or path case that I was looking at. Just a bit of a technical question. Ano? You mentioned you used some clustering algorithms to determine the groups of and segments of viral patterns that you have. Why did you use k-means, and why not other algorithms?
Yes, great question. Thank you. So when we did the clustering, we actually had three main clustering methods to choose from. So we had k-means and hierarchical clustering. We did not pursue DB-scan because of the structure or type of the data that we had. So based on that, when we did k-means versus hierarchical, we found that k-means presented the most interpretable and the one that's most similar to the initial cladogram that we generated. We also did a bit of multidimensional scaling, and we found a very interesting cluster there. But due to the time limit, we weren't able to finish that type of clustering. But in future iterations, that is definitely the mode of clustering that I want to pursue, if ever.
All right. Other than that, I have no further questions. Great work and congrats again.
Thank you.
And I might just jump in, maybe sort of continuing a little bit of what Dominic mentioned about, I guess, being a tool for policymakers. I really liked, I guess, your storytelling around the features like for vulnerability that you chose. I think there were things like number of doctors, population density. Are there any other factors that you might include? Yeah, what else might you use to look at vulnerability, and how might you even communicate that with policymakers as well?
Yes, definitely. So actually, in the main recommendation of this project is increase the data that we use for both virus and for the region demographic. For regions, I'm interested in perhaps using like socioeconomic factors and even like the urban planning of certain regions, because that would affect how these populations interact with these viruses. So those are some characteristics that I'd be interested in adding.
And I guess just another question, maybe about sort of the history of outbreaks. How might you use that as a temporal dimension? Would that be another way to cluster things, or would you be able to sort of see the change in these scores over time? Would you be able to compare a similar score for something that had different characteristics at a previous point in time to maybe clusters that have that characteristics now?
Yeah, so for history, initially I wanted to simply put it in the recommendation of Devin, but I see that there's also value in adding it as another factor to do clustering, but at the virus level, because it could contribute to the risk that they pose rather than the vulnerability of the region.
Can you do a follow-up? Oh, sorry, Caleb, if you want to finish your question. Yeah, so maybe just a few tips for improvement. So if you're going to go for risk management, so that seems to be where you're headed. Typically, vulnerability is only one dimension of risk. No, it's good to have at least three. And for infectious diseases, it's usually a combination of a hazard measure, whether it's mortality or morbidity. And that's either you look at literature or you look at how the virus spreads. Like some measures of infectiousness include parang R0, namang ganyan, if you can get that. Because each disease spreads differently. Then you have your vulnerability, and that's your vulnerable groups. And you mentioned socioeconomic and demographic factors play a big deal. Like for example, if it was dengue, then I'd be looking at populations with children. But if it was COVID, I'd be looking at populations with senior citizens. No? So it's different risks depende sa area. But I think you should have a counter metric, which is the resilience of that area. In other words, how much is the healthcare budget? You already have number of nurses, number of doctors, because that's really the only thing you can influence in the short term, like add more capacity. If that's where you're headed, because that's how the policymakers will think. Okay, so what do you want me to do with this information? Should I double the budget of ARMM, or you know what I mean, or figure out better ways of delivering healthcare in Visayas? Noting, of course, that there's probably economics behind it, no? So it's not as simple as, oh, we're just going to build 10 more hospitals. It's never going to happen if you really want to go that route. But then if you're going that route, maybe the clustering isn't even needed, to be honest, because a lot of these viral information is already well established in literature. So really the machine learning comes in when you try to weight the risk factors and try to predict what would have been the ideal investment given the mortality rate and given the vulnerability. Parang ganun, no? I'm not saying what you did is not useful, but I think you have to make a decision whether what you're doing is sort of descriptive, just describing the vulnerability of a location, but to make it actionable, you have to give your policymaker some actions, no? Whether it's increased investment or something. So just a tip. It's a good, very relevant project. And then actually to give you a tip also, right now, that's where the DOH is fumbling. They're not able to allocate the right resources to the local governments. Because it's not just as simple as, okay, who gets the most number of cases, they get the most number of supplies. It's not that simple. Say in some areas, there may be less cases, but their populations are more at risk. People, they don't get the attention they need. No? And that's what's happening, for example, in Cebu. Whenever there's a surge, Cebu's surge is like 7 times higher than NCR. Why? Because their population is older and they have less healthcare capacity. So I mean, think if you're thinking in those terms, you're actually on the right path. But you need to add more dimensions to your model. So anyway, great work.
Yes, thank you, Doc Lica. So actually, that is one of the things that I wanted to tackle with the project. I actually wanted to hit two birds with one stone here. One is to address the risk management for regions, but also for like healthcare or research institutions, help them identify which viruses are currently posing the most risk, so that they can focus their efforts on researching on how to prevent or mitigate their epidemic potential.
Okay. Okay. So that was quite a lot, no? We traveled from the world of viruses to, well, the everyday lives, the everyday life of exposed populations that might be uh, exposed, no, to these kinds of risks. And it's very important that people, even as early as like Heidi's case, where she's just learning how to code, no, take on these very big projects, no. And I also want to highlight that Heidi is the only our solo capstone pilot here. No, and for her to do all of this on her own, it's quite actually a lot. And it's a marrying of all of these data sets in this one 10-minute presentation. So good, very, very good job. Well done,
Thank
Heidi.
you.
Okay, so I think we also have some questions in our Dorino. And yes, please expect Heidi's response in a bit. But I guess we have to move on to our next presentation. So, okay, our last capstone project of the night. No, so this is by Beverly Lumbera, Bim Buhain, Reniel Dan Pablo, and Precious Eunice Grullo. Their project is entitled Check App, Optimizing Medical Checkups Using Machine Learning. Take it away, guys.
Okay, hi, good evening, everybody. So thank you for coming over and listening to us share about our passion project. So here is our data science solution we like to call Check App. And really, Check App was born from the reality of healthcare here in the Philippines. So here, it's almost as if your spending power can dictate the quality of healthcare that you can receive. So healthcare in the Philippines is highly fragmented. If, for example, you're a pregnant woman, you have the money for a private hospital, you get a private delivery room, your own set of doctors and nurses. But if you can't afford it, you would have to go to a birth center or a fabella. And there you would even be lucky enough if you could get a bed or even anesthesia. So we want to sort of address this big gap in healthcare. But that's not to say that there haven't been any efforts in the past to address this issue.
The latest of these efforts comes in the form of a universal healthcare law. So in 2019, Republic Act number 11223, or the Universal Healthcare Act, was signed into law with the aim of providing equitable access to quality and affordable healthcare and protection from financial risk for Filipinos. Now, while in principle, the Universal Healthcare Act can push for major improvements on the health and well-being of Filipinos, its implementation is rife with challenges. So last year, PhilHealth, the key implementer, sought the delay of the implementation of the law, citing low collection of contributions as a major hindrance for its enforcement. PhilHealth is also currently in deep water with the involvement of its officials in a 15 peso billion fund scandal. Now, occurrences such as this can hamper the provision of affordable and quality healthcare services for all Filipinos. This begs the question, given the status quo, what else can be done to broaden Filipinos' access to healthcare? To provide a concrete and practical solution to this question, our team looked further and analyzed the current outpatient flow of primary healthcare delivery in the country. As you can see in this diagram, accessing healthcare services can be costly, both in terms of time and money. A lot of referrals and redundant steps can easily balloon the out-of-pocket expenses of a patient who must pay an average of 500 pesos per visit. This excludes possible laboratory and diagnostic fees. Our proposed solution is CheckUp, a project that aims to broaden access to healthcare, but by optimizing the system and eliminating redundant steps in the process. CheckUp connects patients directly to the specialist they most likely need based on their symptoms. This translates to less doctor visits and referrals, which means less consultation fee expenses for the patient. And alternatively, this can result in significantly more time and money saved for both patients and doctors.
So while we had this grand design in our heads already for CheckUp, for this specific project, of course, we had to consider the limitations of this exercise. So time frame and resources, we took that into account. And so we tightened our scope into these three elements. So the first would be we had to limit the medical specialties. So instead of taking the whole universe of medical specialties, we're taking into account only three. So that's ENT, Ophtha, and Neuro. The reason being that we actually have an ENT specialist in our team, and as well as ENT, Ophtha, and Neuro have a lot of intersections since they deal mostly with the upper part of the anatomy. So we were thinking that if you're able to achieve high accuracy when it comes to delineating between these three specialties, it can hint at the possible accuracy for checkup in the future. Secondly, we do want to include as well a recommender engine for CheckUp wherein we would recommend doctors to the users based on their location. And of course, the locations that we'll cover is limited by the directory that we were able to acquire, as well as, of course, privacy considerations wherein we're using aliases for the doctors. And last, we want CheckUp currently runs only on English. So developing the app, we took a 5-step process towards this, and we'll take you through each of these steps in detail.
So first, we gathered a master list of diseases from WHO, retrieving 1,108 results across ENT, neuro, and ophtha. Next, these were used to scrape their respective symptoms using Beautiful Soup and Selenium from sources like PubMed, Mayo Clinic, and others. To verify, we consulted medical experts under these specialties. After processing and cleaning these data, while not perfectly balanced, this allowed us to use these for the modeling later on. Lastly, data cleaning and pre-processing were done using a combination of SPACY, SciSPACY, and GenSim to output the following set of features per condition, resulting to this project's metadata.
Data exploration showed that the correlated n-grams are faithful to their corresponding specialty. For the modeling, we used several text classification models from scikit-learn. We did tenfold cross-validation and hyperparameter tuning. Shown are the metrics as mean values. We can see that the 4 text classification models had good performances. Based on the relatively better metrics, simplicity and interpretability of the model, we selected logistic regression as our final model. Here, we can see the classification report. Important to note is that F1 and accuracy scores for all classes are 94 to 95%.
For the deployment of our project, we decided to use Facebook's Messenger as the host of our checkup chatbot because of one primary reason: accessibility. With over 74 million active Filipino users, anyone can access and use checkup wherever, whenever. To implement this, we used Python as the primary language for the data and backend part of our chatbot, supported by Flask and ngrok to temporarily host the webhook URL required by Facebook's developer API service. The current user experience flow is shown, but I think it's better if we have a demo instead. You can use our checkup chatbot by visiting our page, greet our chatbot hello to start, click consult my condition, and send what you're experiencing right now. Then confirm your response before our chatbot can process it. Once processed, it will return you what specialist to consult to based on your response earlier. You can click recommend to me, then just reply your location. Once confirmed, our checkup chatbot will suggest you the specialist you need in your area. Simple, right? That's Checkup, our friendly chatbot.
Checkup can also be a flexible application that can be integrated to your clinical decision support system. First, Checkup can serve as an open source platform to help government health institutions or nonprofit organizations make their processes more efficient. Second, Checkup can be integrated into the system of private and public hospitals to direct their patients to their in-house specialists. Lastly, Checkup can be utilized by medical insurance providers to reduce some of their costs, including doctors' consultation fees.
This is sort of like the first step that we're taking into developing CheckApp as a possible solution for Filipinos, right? So the next steps that we're seeing down the line would be first, of course, would be to increase the number of specializations. So CheckUp runs on 3, but we can easily expand this. And a good way to sort of take the next step forward would be to reference this against the top diseases in the Philippines so that we can have added relevance for the specialties that we'll be including. Number 2, the data that CheckUp is based on is mostly scraped from the internet. So it's an overview of the diseases, of the symptoms. We feel like adding more patient complaints, actual patient complaints, would help us enrich the model so that the model can sort of learn the unique ways on how Filipinos describe their symptoms or describe the things that they're feeling in their body. Third, the directory of specialists can be easily expanded, of course, so that whenever people use CheckUp, they can get a doctor recommendation wherever they are in the country. Fourth, since CheckUp currently runs on English only, we were thinking of integrating a powerful translation package here, for example, Google Cloud Translate, so that people can actually interact with CheckUp in their own native tongue. And the last two would be the fifth is we can also consider using an NLP model that can understand contextual relationships between words. Now, an example of this would be birth. And why do we want this? It's because as well, when people describe their symptoms, it would be interesting to see if by learning the contextual relationship between the words, maybe the model can understand the symptoms better, as well as being able to have this vocabulary of synonyms so that it can understand what people are saying. And lastly, we see also a potential for CheckUp to sort of streamline the paperwork flow for medical practitioners. So built inside the app itself, we could actually create a interview process wherein the output would be a patient file record that we can easily transmit to our partner, clinics, and health institutions. So that's it. This has been Check Up, our data science solution to broaden healthcare for Filipinos. First step, but we're very excited to see where this journey will take us. Thank you for listening, and we're opening the floor for questions.
All right, so that was Team Check Up. Team Check Up. No, thanks so much for that presentation. So again, same format as earlier. No, we'll start with our panel of judges for the round of questions. But yes, for our audience, the link, that Dory link for your questions is posted in the chat. So please just type it there. You know what? We have an NLP domain expert here in Francis, knows doing this in his company. No, I'm interested to hear his insights first. So Francis, are you ready to ask?
Hi guys. Good evening. Great stuff. This is really cool stuff. Actually had a project that was very closely related to what you guys were doing. So do take note that this is something you can definitely take to prod and to enterprise. If there's something that if you wanna push through with this, no. A few quick questions. Why did you decide to stick with those 3 specializations?
Thanks, Francis, for that question. So the real reason is that one of our teammates is actually an ENT specialist. So to be able to to make sure that we have the domain knowledge when it comes to looking and analyzing at the data, as well as checking the accuracy of our model, we chose to stick to those 3 categories. And based on I think Eunice has also mentioned this. Those 3 categories are actually in real life tend to overlap. And as a matter of fact, before the specialization, ENT used to be EENT. So the concerns of the eyes are used to be included with ENT. So that's the primary reason, really.
Got it. That's yeah, that was a question mostly out of interest. That was one of the challenges we encountered when trying to build classifiers for specializations, was that if you work with a pulmo case or a GI case or even a cardio case, they would tend to overlap very heavily, especially when you start throwing in other specializations. So I think it was a good step to initially focus on OFTA, ENT, and I think neuro, considering those language bodies are very different from one another. One recommendation, and I think we're seeing this on the chat now. Have you guys considered the Telegram API or something like that? Because that's something that you can deploy really quickly and easily without having to go through the typical moderation that Facebook has.
For that, we were actually planning on deploying it with Telegram as well. Actually, it's our first option to deploy it with Telegram. However, it defeats the purpose of being accessible to most Filipinos because most Filipinos aren't Telegram users. So we opted Messenger to be the host of our chatbot. But adding Telegram as one of the tools to use the chatbot is maybe a recommendation we can decide on later on if we pursue the project. But I do agree, Telegram is easy to deploy, especially with this kind of project.
Got it. Sige. Thanks. Another comment. I really like that you guys are really working towards a context-aware and context-based NLP system. No, this is something that majority of the chatbots I've encountered fail to do. You ask for your bank account details, and then you ask for, like, the typical flow would be asking for your bank account details and then asking for something else. And that's basically a context jump. So if you guys build something that will be aware of these things and handle the conversation well, that will be really valuable for your end users. You know, because patients would typically complain of one thing and then they jump to another thing. So you have to be very wary about these sort of patients. Like, the patients are not medical experts. They will say, masakit yung ulo ko, and it could be an entirely different diagnosis. So just be aware of these things. One maybe technical question: how would you go about handling the multi-language problem here? Because that's definitely gonna hit 90% of your market.
Originally, we wanted to explore actually incorporating a translation package. We did try the free Google Translate package in Python, but it had a lot of shortcomings. So that's why we were kind of interested to see that maybe in the future, if we could get some more resources, if we sort of pair this with something more powerful like Google Cloud Translate, it would work better. But to be honest, it is a huge challenge and obstacle that we're seeing down the line, because the Filipino language is so nuanced, including also the dialects. Yes. And all of that. But it's something that we want to work towards.
So guys, if you're serious about pursuing this, feel free to message me. I'll give you guys a model that can handle Tagalog, Visayan, and other Filipino languages. No? But off the bat, you can look at LaSalle's Palito Corpus. It's a corpus that came out of the DLSU language lab way back in 2010. It's very comprehensive. It supports a lot of the colloquial languages, dialects, jargon that the typical Filipino has. But definitely turn to Twitter, Reddit, Facebook if you can. Scrape the language that Filipinos use there. Build a network-based model, and you'll be able to handle a lot of the language challenges that we encountered here. So yeah, also look into Vader if that's something that interests you guys. It's a language model that you can use as a translation model as well. So other than that, great work, guys. Really happy to see more folks doing NLP in the medical space. That's actually my day job, so I'm happy to see a lot of the of progress working in this space though. So healthcare is a real big opportunity for AI. Like, typically it's about EMRs and that sort of thing. That's very passe. We really need to help our doctors do actual doctoring work and not just paperwork. So props to you guys for that.
All right. So if any of our other panelists have their questions.
Sure. So congrats to the team on a really cool project. Looking forward to being a tester once it's available, once it gets approved. And I wanted to see if we could dig into the performance metrics a little bit. Maybe you could walk us through the properties of the test set, and when we report an accuracy, then what does that accuracy mean for the context of the test set?
We will share the slide po. So this is the test set, 25% test set. For the accuracy, it means correctly classified as the specialty, ear, nose, throat, as the predicted is ear, nose, throat, and then the actual is ear, nose, throat. That's the accuracy part.
Oh, I see. So I guess is the input a sentence or is it a word?
The input for words, sentence, group of words. Like the patient symptoms or complaints.
I see. Great. And then after the system has classified, a query into one of these classes, then what's the next step after that? What would the system do with that information?
So if the probability is above 0.5, we will the system will recommend a specialist. If it is below that, the system will recommend seeing a general practitioner first. And then after that, the system will ask about the location of the user. So if there's a specialist in that location, the system will recommend that specialist. If there's none, the system will recommend an telemedicine doctor.
Cool. And can't help but geek out on some of the engineering here, but one opportunity, I'm not sure if your team considered Google Dialogflow as one of your options, but it seems to support some of the language features that was on your list of desired features, including things like synonyms. Unfortunately, the language, Filipino languages, are not supported today. But if you're working in the context of English, then you can throw a list of synonyms into a pretty user-friendly interface and generate chatbots pretty quickly that can be deployed to multiple channels, including Facebook Messenger, Telegram, Line, Slack, a number of other channels just out of the box, and then maybe that could render the problem into more of developing this, taxonomy and hierarchy of terms that you could use to guide users. And curious, who amongst your target market would be feeling the pain points and need this product the very most?
I guess I could take that question. We wanted to originally, I think the main vision for the app would be to target those who wouldn't have the financial capacity to consult first with a general practitioner. Ideally, the sort of steps when you sort of are an outpatient is you go see a doctor, and the doctor will either tell you what you need, or if it requires a specialist, usually that general practitioner will bounce you off to someone else. So we want to sort of offer this to people who may not have the funds to afford multiple consultations. So instead of going to a different set of doctors every time, they can go to just one. And hopefully that'll sort of help alleviate how heavy it would be to sort of go to a lot of different doctors.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
All right. No, accessibility is really a big problem, in terms of these kinds of products. And I hope this would really help out, when it's finally deployed. But yeah, you as a medical project, medical field related project, you have handled sensitive data in the realm of patient level data, and also to the practitioners that you mentioned as in the chat, when it tries to recommend you with an expert that would cater your project, the concerns of your patient. So actually, Sir Dominic, leads here are an ethics org. No, is that correct? No, so would you have some insights on how they handled the ethics part of this project? And of course, if you have other insights, that would be great.
Well, it's not so much an ethics question, more of an operational question. So you said your app is for people who don't have the budget, no? But would there be like a B2B or a corporate client in mind for the solution? Or is it something you want to deploy in a hospital or some other, I mean, you need to find a way to get to the doctors as well, right? So any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Actually, when we were doing related review of related literature, there was already a study that did an assessment of how medical health practitioners feel about artificial intelligence performing their jobs. And the initial hypothesis that doctors or other medical health professionals would feel shunned away by such processes or innovations because they think that such applications would replace their task or their functions. But the study actually concluded or was able to find out a different answer. Most medical health professionals actually approve or agree to the use or of such interventions because especially when it comes to some steps like speeding up or making efficient recommendations or some administrative matters that most medical health professionals don't have the time to perform. So as we have mentioned in our presentation, just writing a referral, it's very, it takes a lot of manual labor. But with the application, you can speed up the process and possibly save a life by saving time on the referrals of patients.
Yeah, so I think it's good you mentioned that, no, because I don't think the value of this app is necessarily to the patients. I think the value is to the doctors. So I mean, just consider that thought, no? Because number one, in general, there's a shortage of doctors across all specializations, and they're usually siloed in hospitals or wherever. So I think a good, I'm not saying this is the best, no, but I think a good use case for this would be for you to approach something like a MaxiCare or some HMO provider. Kasi kunyari, when you go to a hospital, like you want to get treated for, let's say, diabetes. So you need an endocrinologist. But you don't know which endocrinologists are registered with MaxiCare. Let's say you're a MaxiCare customer. So you have to go to MaxiCare and ask them, okay, are there any endocrinologists in this hospital so that I can get myself checked? That process takes about a day. No? But if you're sitting at home and you have these symptoms, let's say you don't even know what your disease is, and I think that's where your NLP comes in. It already tells you, here are the top 10 doctors near your location specializing in diabetes. So it's really more a way of matching doctors and patients, even though you know they sit across different hospitals. No? I think that's the game changer. But then you need a backer. No? So I'm not saying you approach MaxiCare, but something like that. No? Or even better, you go to a medical association. May mga ganun, di ba? Association of Dermatologists, Association of Endocrinologists. That's why these doctors have a lot of these initials sa dulo. No? They're members of associations. Why? Because they need that to make a living. If you're a member of an association, you get referred by the doctors in that association. No? Lalo na the high-profile professions, no? Like cardiology, mga usong sakit, no? Heart disease, diabetes. So even if there are a lot of them, there's still a shortage. Now it even gets worse when you go national. Let's say you're in Iloilo. Probably the shortage in Panay Island is even worse now compared to NCR. So this is a way of, it's kind of like an Uber, no? An Uber for doctors. So you have patients, you have doctors, you match. And the way you match is you either know what your symptoms are or you know what you're sick of, and then the app does the matching. But you need that parang a backer or a marketplace that can do it. If you do it in a vacuum, no one will use it, no? But if you say na, hey, look, we have 10,000 doctors in our database and we're backed by, HMO providers. And the real value add is you skip all of that administrative cost. No? And then later, actually, it gets even better because there's an opportunity to integrate diagnosis, no, into the app. Like, Dr. X ordered a CT scan, Dr. Y ordered a blood test. But that's very, very, going back to the ethics, no, that's very, very sensitive information. But I'm still curious why there isn't a national database of, hey, look, if my cholesterol is at this level, my blood sugar is at this level, the odds of me getting certain disease. I think that's where what you were saying. The doctors kasi do that diagnosis. They read the chart. But I think if you have a very progressive, group of doctors, and they're willing to let an app do the pre-diagnosis, kasi most of it naman is documented na in literature. Like, okay, you're hypertensive if your BP is between this range and that range, and most likely you're either diabetic or you have a heart disease. And then the app recommends, okay, here are the top 10 heart specialists in your location, and we've already taken the liberty of booking an appointment with one of them. No, that can be a game changer. Lalo na ngayon na we're in lockdowns. Very hard to go to a hospital now. Most likely you can't even get in because of the COVID. No? So I mean, that wasn't really a question. It's really more about you have a solid NLP play, but now you have to find a good use case. No? And I think you should target doctors. That's my sense. That's how I would go about it. Because the patients are there's thousands of patients. You're never going to run out of them. But the doctors are the smaller commodity. They're the ones who you should optimize.
I agree with Sir Dominic. No? That's a good take on it. On the other side naman, consider how the doctors would take in your product. Maybe we could have one last question from Caleb.
Sure. I thought maybe it's a slightly lighter question, but in my experience, people try and break chatbots. That they try and put garbage in, they try and sort of get silly responses. How might you handle that? Your list of symptoms. What might you do to sort of protect, especially I guess the contextual flow there, with sort of I guess garbage that goes in.
Right now, what we've done with the sort of design of the recommender engine is to include a threshold, wherein it's actually two things that we put in. One is if the information is not enough, the chatbot would actually ask for more symptoms. Like, what do you mean? What exactly are you feeling? Can you describe it in more words? And number two, if the probability threshold is not reached, the one that Eunice mentioned, if it doesn't go beyond 50%, it won't actually recommend a specialist. It would instead recommend a general practitioner, because of the fact that we also don't want to sort of misdiagnose. So we want to be very sure when we push our customers in the right direction, so to speak.
Cool, thank you.
All right, so thanks for those questions, panel. No? For our audience who have asked in our Dory link, no, please be assured that the fellows would take on your questions after this. No, so okay, so that's it for our presentations. No, but before we close the night, the Eskwelabs team has sent over a short feedback form there in our chats for you to fill up. No, and yes, so we take your feedback very seriously, and we will be using this to improve our events in the future. So yes, we value your thoughts and your time, no, and that's why for those of you who will answer the feedback form, we have an offer for you. You will receive an exclusive 50% off Aral Plus promo code. So you may claim or get your promo code in the confirmation page of the submitted Google form for this. Okay. Now, to close us off, I'll be handing the floor to Caleb again, our CTO and co-founder. Caleb.
Thank you, Jesse. On behalf of the Eskwelabs team, thank you so much to our audience for joining the Data Science Fellowship Demo Day. Special thanks to our guest speaker from Miami and our distinguished panel of judges. And of course, a big round of applause to our Data Science Cohort 7 Fellows. The next cohort for our Data Science Fellowship is on November the 15th, and we're happy to share that we are offering scholarships for the program, including one focused on data for good. For more information on our program, please head on to the link sent in the chat. Have a great evening, everyone, and see you at our next demo day.